I have an encounter I'd like to share with you. It was hands down the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I've been to Afghanistan on 2 different occasions. This encounter with something was in the Canadian Rockies back in 1997. My friends and I were camping when we encountered something I've never seen before, and thanks to God, have never seen since. And I still don't exactly know what it was. All I know for sure was the terror that all of us felt that night, and that whatever it was that we saw was nothing that God or man knows to exist. Everything started off innocent enough. There were 4 of us. The names aren't important, so I'm not going to tell you them. It was your typical camping trip with 4 buddies, drinking, cooking over the fire, talking shit to each other. Typical buddy stuff. Especially since all of us hadn't seen each other for a long time, and it was fun just catching up. We were the only ones there that night, and we were only there for 1 night. That was enough for all of us. Even before nightfall, we started hearing the growling. But it wasn't your typical growl, not from a wolf or a dog or a bear or a mountain lion. Nothing like that. It was more of a whisper. It was really weird. It was so windy, we blamed it on the wind and the alcohol. But goddamn were we wrong. We went hiking at one point that day, and that whisper growling continued. Worse than that, all 4 of us felt uneasy. Like we shouldn't be there. And at one point or another, every one of us voiced that out loud. That something just wasn't right about this place. Something was really wrong with this situation. I had a sidearm with me, but I still felt nervous. We all sat down and talked about how weird it was and decided that it was all our imagination and we were just playing off of one another's paranoia, so we decided to stay that night. Worse than that though, when we were hiking, I could have sworn that something was following us. I know I saw something moving in the tree line at least twice, but it was too fast to actually catch a glimpse of. The hair was standing up on my arms and on the back of my neck. I really had no good excuse for it, but I decided to keep hiking on and not say anything. Again, I just decided that it was my friend's paranoia that was playing into my own paranoia, and that I was just letting my imagination run wild. As we continued to hike, though, we all heard that weird growling sound at one point or another, and we also heard leaves crunching. 2 of my buddies thought it was trippy. They kept making jokes about werewolves and Bigfoot. I thought they were just being stupid. It seemed at this point that we all shook off those creepy feelings and decided to make the best of our camping trip, since we don't all see each other that often, and it was good that the 4 of us could spend the weekend together. We stopped to spark a joint, and as we were sitting around the rocks, smoking, we heard this god-awful scream off in the distance. I can't even begin to describe the way this scream sounded. It was unnatural. Nothing human, or any animal I know of, could make that noise. It was high-pitched, I can tell you that, and whatever made it sounded mad, or violent. Hell, maybe both. It was enough to get the 4 of us on our feet and heading back to our campsite. All 4 of us were once again very aware of our surroundings at that point, and all paranoid again. All 4 of us kept watching around the tree lines and the area around us until we got back to camp. When we got there, one of my buddies really wanted to go home, but the other 3 of us convinced him to stay. We should have listened to him, bro. I swear, what the hell were we thinking? All those warning signs were going off, and us dumbasses just ignored them all. We were just trying to be tough. It was all good for a few hours. We tried to push the scream out of our minds. Maybe it was a mountain lion in heat, something like that. But eventually, all of us started bringing it up again. Again, one of my buddies tried to rationalize the mountain lion in heat theory. I'm not even sure there's mountain lions in Canada. I've never seen one. But I sure as hell know it was no damn mountain lion after what we saw that night. The way our campsite was set up, we had a camper shell on the back of a truck that we were using, and it was parked off to the side of our site. We had a 6-man tent we pitched that all 4 of us were planning on sleeping in, and that was close enough to the fire to illuminate the outside if you're sitting in it, but far enough away to prevent it from catching on fire. Around the fire, we had our folding chairs and a cooler, which we planned on putting in the camper shell when we went to bed so it wouldn't get screwed with by animals. We also had a collapsible table to play cards on, and to keep some of our stuff on. At this point, we had our portable stove, a couple lanterns, and a plastic tub for our dishes and utensils out. So we made our fire before the sun went down, roasted dogs over it, and talked more about what the scream could have been. I wasn't too worried, though. I had my sidearm with me the whole time, and after hearing that scream, there was no way in hell I was going to be caught without it. Again, I think I was just trying to be tough, trying to push the thought of what it could be out of my mind. I wanted to show my friends that I was big and tough, because I was going into the army. Once the sun went down, we crowded around the fire and talked about life. It wasn't all the time the four of us got together, and we had some catching up to do. My buddy was in the middle of telling us about his dad's recovery from a heart attack when another buddy and I heard that whispering growl again. He hushed everyone and we listened, not one of us making a sound. Then we heard it again. I put my hand on my weapon and saw my buddy do the same to his. Now, I was scared. What the hell was out there? It was nighttime now. Our vision wasn't as good as it was going to be during the day. Something could be out in the tree line watching us at that moment and we never would have known. But then, the growling stopped and everything went back to normal. Or, as normal as it could be after that, I mean. I felt we should move our group into the tent, and the others agreed, so we moved the coolers into the camper and went into the tent. We started talking again, but a loud bang from outside ended that conversation. The four of us argued for a minute about what to do. I wanted to go out and see what the hell was going on. My weapon was ready. I had it in my hand at this point. Another of my buddies wanted to do the same, but the other two were less eager to investigate. We managed to talk them into it, citing that there are four of us, and we were all grown men. Once we unzipped the tent and looked outside with our flashlights, nothing was there. But to our shock, we found out what caused the noise. Our table had been knocked over, and everything on it scattered across the ground. It wasn't windy out. Nothing could have blown that over. Something had to have knocked it over. At this point, all four of us started trying to talk all at once about what to do. Should we go back in the tent? Should we pack up and get the hell out of there? Should we go outside and stand our ground? There was a huge part of me that really thought we were letting our imaginations get to us still. Again, I was wrong. The growling started again, and I snapped back to reality. My hopes of it being my imagination vanished. And that scream from earlier, what was going on? We decided the safest course was to hang out in the bed of the truck for the remainder of the night, just in case. It was a lot more secure than the vinyl that our tent was made out of. So the four of us piled into the camper shell and tried to chill out. One of my buddies was more freaked out than the rest of us, and really didn't want anything to do with what was going on. I was trying to calm him down, while the other two were watching out the windows, when one of them let out a surprised yell. "What the hell was that?" He said it was something tall and pale that he caught a glimpse of. Now all four of us were looking out the windows, waiting to catch a glimpse of what he saw. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty into the paranormal, and I was a little exhilarated at the idea of witnessing something. But the better portion of my brain wanted to stay ignorant to the things that go bump in the night. Worse yet, though, was the friend that saw it said that whatever it was looked like it was walking around on two legs. Our other friends asked if it could have been a person, but he said no. This thing just moved too differently than a human would, and it was too fast. As true as I'm sitting here, recounting this story, and getting goosebumps while I type it, with a good cup of whiskey, I swear to you that the next part is 100% true. The four of us were huddled together, looking out the window that my buddy had seen the creature from, and all of a sudden, this loud, long, scratching sound came from the other side of the camper shell. That's when we couldn't take it anymore. We looked over there, still couldn't see anything, but then we decided it was time to get the hell out of there. Whatever it was had circled around us and targeted us from behind, without our even knowing. Getting out of that camper shell was one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life, even with my pistol out and ready to fire. I've literally been in a war zone, bullets whizzing past me, bombs exploding, pulling my buddies out of wreckage. But this was scarier than that, because at least over in Afghanistan I knew I was up against a person. This defied all rational thought. This was a creature that nobody even thinks should exist. Whatever it was scarier than anything that I saw in Afghanistan. We literally just grabbed everything we had and threw it into the bed of the truck. We didn't pack up. We weren't organized. We were getting the hell out of there before one of us, or all of us, got killed by whatever the hell that was circling our truck. We kept asking my buddy that caught a glimpse of it what he thought it was, but he just kept saying he didn't know. That nothing that he saw, or anything he thinks he saw, could be real. We tore down the tent as fast as humanly possible, shoved it into the camper, and scrambled around grabbing the last of our stuff. I was positive that whatever it was that was out there was going to attack us before we could leave, especially when I heard that growling again. We piled into the truck and started it up. My buddy yelled out again and pointed out the window. All four of us saw it this time. What I was looking at was a monster. It was just standing there, breathing heavily, almost like it was in pain. It was pale, extremely pale, like it was frozen almost, and this son of a bitch was tall, at least 7 feet. Its face and body were sunken in, like it hadn't eaten in months. It looked too skinny to even be alive. I could see ribs, cheekbones. It was just withered. Its arms and fingers were long and skinny. It looked like the skin was stretched over the bones. I didn't see hair anywhere on this thing. It was hard to make out a face in the darkness, until I shined a light on it, hoping to scare it away. I wish to this day that I didn't, because that face, those eyes, still haunt my nightmares. Anytime I have a nightmare that doesn't involve me being back in Afghanistan, it has to do with this creature. Hell, sometimes my nightmares have me back in Afghanistan, and that thing is hunting me. I don't like to talk about the things that I witnessed over there. I like to talk about this even less. And it's because of that face. What I saw was dark, black, sunken eyes. And it looked like it was grinning. That grin had this mouthful of sharp teeth. With that, we took off, not giving this thing a chance to attack, since the flashlight didn't have any effect on it. As my buddy drove, the other three of us stared back at that thing. It didn't give chase or anything. It just stood there, turning its head to watch us drive off. But the way it moved wasn't as fluid as my friend saw it running around outside. This was more ratcheted, like as it turned its head, its bones were snapping or creaking, if that makes any sense to you. I could imagine the sound of the bones popping in its neck as it looked back at us. When we got back to the main road, we stopped and collected ourselves. None of us had any answer for what we witnessed. It was the craziest thing I've ever experienced. Since then, I've done a lot of reading and research to try and figure out what it was. I honestly think it was a Wendigo. I'm curious to see what you and your creatures of the night think it was. It's something I'll never forget. For a long time after that, any time I closed my eyes, all I saw was that thing's face. I don't like to go back into the woods anymore because of it. I don't think you could blame me for that either. Because, like I've said before, even as scary as Afghanistan was, looking into the soulless eyes of this monster that shouldn't exist is even scarier than that. I wish everybody listening this safe travels. If you go into the woods, don't go alone. Don't go unarmed. These things are out there. And just because I got away and my friends got away doesn't mean that everybody else is going to be so lucky. Stay safe. Matt. My name is Alexander, and this encounter happened to my boyfriend and I in 2009 while we were attending UCF. It wasn't long or even a scary encounter, but I've listened to your stories on here, and I think you'll like it. Hopefully, your subscribers will too. I've only ever found one other person besides Carlos and myself that have ever witnessed this thing, so if you've heard of it before, or if anyone listening has, please let me know. Because of our choices of majors, we went out and spent a lot of time in the Everglades. I was interested in conservation biology, while Carlos was more interested in field botany. We would try to go to the glades as much as we could. If you've ever been to the Everglades, you know how dense it can be, and how vast the water can stretch. I loved it all, especially the wildlife. I could spend hours watching gators move around and watching the hawks fly around. When I was out there, I was in heaven. The area we hiked to, a lot of the time, was pretty marshy. There were some nice swamp areas around there, and you could really get a good look at the wildlife of the area. It was a great combination of land and swamp that you could wade through. Of course, you always had to look out for coral snakes, cottonmouths, and a few other types of rattlers. And then of course there's the gators too. But I still love it. One time, I helped rescue an osprey that had an injured wing, and we rehabilitated him. The only thing that could make being out there better was if I could see a Florida panther. But, of course, that is very unlikely. Anyways, one day, while we were out there, I was doing a paper on the effects invasive species have on a local wildlife, and naturally, I was focusing on feral pigs and the Burmese python. Carlos was out there with me and kept reminding me that there were tons of invasive plants that were wreaking havoc on the Everglades too. I didn't really have an interest in plants. He's the plant guy. All I cared about was getting my paper and getting an A. I was in the zone with my paper. I had a million thoughts in my head, and I wanted to write them all down. After a while, he started tapping me on the shoulder, pretty frantically. I was still busy surveying a wallow and jotting down notes on how pigs were uprooting plants. Now, something you should know about Carlos. I love this man to death. He's been my partner for almost 11 years, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life with him. But the man is dramatic. Picture a very flamboyant male hairdresser, and replace the scissors with a notebook full of botany notes, and that's Carlos. So, he starts tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Alex," in a whisper. I snapped at him and looked backwards in his direction. His appearance was almost comical. He was standing there, one hand on his chest like he was about to pass out, and the other frantically pointing in the other direction. "It's a monster," he whispered. I rolled my eyes and looked over where he was pointing. "What in the hell is that?" I half whispered, half choked out. There really was a monster. Honest to God, as I'm sitting here right now typing this. This thing was crouching on the other side of a swampy area, about 10 feet from the water. I'm not sure what it was doing, and it was facing off to the side at first, so I only had a profile view. It was this thing that was crouching there. It looked scaly. It didn't have any hair or any noticeable ears. It looked like it was digging in the mud, or maybe pawing at something. We stood there, grabbing onto each other for a few seconds as we watched this creature do its thing. Then, it stood up and walked towards the water on 2 legs. It wasn't very tall, maybe 4 or 5 feet if I had to guess. It was completely naked, but I couldn't see any private parts. But it was covered in those scales. It was this greenish-brown color and kind of buff, like a track runner, not like a bodybuilder. I don't know if this thing ever even saw us. It waded into the water, and we watched its head bob up and down as it swam away. We stood there, completely shocked at what we watched. I looked over at Carlos. The poor man was trembling. See? Dramatic. I told him it was going to be okay, and I eventually calmed him down, but he really wanted to leave right then and there. As a wildlife major, though, I wanted to chase after this thing and find out what it was, or at least get another look at it, or maybe even a picture. Once we got back to our apartment, I called my best friend and told her all about it. So she told me we were crazy, obviously, and that we misidentified something, like an alligator. I told her that she was just being stupid, and I know what we saw. This was no alligator. It didn't even kind of look like an alligator. It was a lizard man. I argued with her for a little while. She was sure we were either making it up or made a mistake. But we know otherwise. Once Tuesday came around, I was the first one into my bio lab and tried to talk to the professor about it, who was also a wildlife biologist, and somebody I considered a personal friend. He too didn't believe me. He was one of those types that only believe in things that were explainable by science. I wasn't convincing him at all. He did, however, let me start a debate on the subject, which surprisingly had a lot of people that thought a reptile boy could be possible. By a lot, I mean 7, but 7 was more than I thought I was going to get. For the record, I didn't admit to seeing it to my peers. I only opened the debate on whether or not it could exist. A few weeks went by, and the reptile boy was constantly on my mind. Carlos didn't want to go back to the Glades, and wasn't letting me go either. I kept researching, trying to find anything I could about what I had seen. I found stories about gatormen and the lizard of Scape Swamp, but neither of them matched what we had seen. The lizard man's description matched the most of those two, but a lot of those reports say they had hair. This little guy didn't have any hair at all. They also say the lizard people are 7 feet tall, so unless this was a baby, I don't think it could have been the same thing. Eventually, I gave up my search and life returned to normal. Then one day, out of the blue a couple years later, one of my classmates from Biolab contacted me and told me he wanted to talk to me. When I met up with him, he told me he knew someone that actually encountered something along the lines of the thing that I was debating about. I had to find out who that person was. As luck would have it, she wanted to tell her story, so I met with her for lunch. She told me that a few years ago, she was out with a guide, her aunt, uncle, and a sister on an airboat, and saw the same creature on the shore. She said it looked like it was sunbathing. Once it realized there were people there, it bolted into the water and disappeared. But she described the same thing that I saw. Scales, no ears, hairless, and walking upright. She said it was fast on land, and she didn't see it at all when it went underwater. She was afraid it was going to come and attack the boat, but apparently it swam off without a hitch. To me, these guys, or maybe even the same one, seemed to be more afraid of people than the other way around. A lot of reports of the skateboard lizard people and the Thetis lake monster talk about aggression. This guy didn't seem aggressive, and neither does the one that she saw. But again, it could be the same one, because I think it was around the same time that she saw it. She didn't know the exact date, but it was the same year. It also seemed more like it wanted to flee than fight with Julie's encounter. Maybe it was a baby, or maybe it's not aggressive. Who knows? While I was researching, I stumbled upon reports of the Loveland Frogman, but again, the description doesn't match. They look more amphibious than reptilian, but their behavior seems right. The Frogman reports usually talk about them fleeing at the sight of people, which is exactly what this creature seemed to do. But again, the description just isn't right. I'm not sure I'll ever find out what I saw. Reports seem scarce, and there's not much on the internet. Hopefully, someone listening to this had a similar encounter and can share it with all of us, or at least knows what this creature can be. I do know one thing though. What I saw was real, and I didn't make any mistakes identifying it. It also changed my perspective on what's out there. Maybe all of these creatures are from a different world, or maybe it's just a simple case of evolution. I mean, it makes sense for something like a Sasquatch or Dogman to evolve into something that takes advantage of the woods and the mountains. If there ever was a place that a reptile creature could evolve into something like what we saw, it's in the Everglades. I've been back there countless times since then. Sometimes with Carlos, sometimes with Julie, sometimes by myself, when neither of them want to go around and investigate. But, like I said before, if you've ever been to the Everglades, you know how vast this place really is. I don't know if I'll ever see this creature again, but I do like to keep an open eye and an open mind, just to make sure that I don't miss anything. Best wishes, Alex. My name is Marie, and I think something is following me. I've seen this thing 3 times, or at least I think I've seen part of it. It looks invisible to me, usually just a ripple in the area where it's at. 2 of these encounters happened right here in my hometown, Richfield, Minnesota, and the other happened during a camping trip where I was a little less than 2 hours from Richfield. The reason I think it's following me is because it just keeps appearing in the places that are so random. Do I just happen to be seeing this thing from time to time? Or do you guys really think it's following me? It's never done anything to hurt me, and it never seems aggressive. The first time I saw this thing was in 2018, when I was sitting in my car in a parking lot. I'd just stopped to get lunch, Burger King of all places, and there was about 10 minutes before I saw this thing moving. I'm not sure how long it was there before I noticed it. It was also raining that day. The first thing I noticed was movement, about 5 feet in front of my car. Like a gust of wind kicking up debris, but not quite. It was like this wavy outline of something. It was about 4 feet tall, and seemed to have a solid structure, but I promise you, there was nothing there. Whatever this thing was invisible. I actually wiped my eyes, thinking that maybe I was seeing things. But the more I stared at it, whatever it was, the more I was sure that something was definitely there. I looked down on the ground and could actually see where the puddles of rainwater were splashing when this thing moved. I kept watching, trying to make sense of whatever I was looking at. I guess I was trying to rationalize what I was seeing too. Maybe the puddles were splashing because of the rain? No. The rain wasn't even that hard to cause such a thing. Maybe it was just the rainwater forming in the shape of my windshield. No, because this was definitely outside of my car and standing in front of me. Then it stopped and I lost track of it. I decided it was my imagination and started my car back up. I had to get back to work. As I drove off, I laughed at myself for getting worked up and headed back to work to finish my day. By the time I was off work that night, I'd basically forgot about the whole thing and went about my normal routine. It wasn't until another 10 months after that I think I saw it again, because that's when I saw it for the second time. I was camping with 2 friends of mine off the river, about an hour and 45 minutes away from Richfield. We'd been out there for 4 nights already, and this was on the 5th night at dusk that I saw this thing again. I was just sitting in a lawn chair by the fire when it happened again. I started to notice movement without actually seeing anything. The first thing I noticed was little clumps of dirt being kicked up, like someone was walking around, only there was nobody there. At first, it didn't register what was happening, kind of like my brain was disconnected or something. I knew what I was looking at, but my brain just didn't feel like reacting. Then I noticed the outline of it again, and I knew I was seeing the same damn thing I saw all those months ago. It was about 15 feet away from me, and this time, it was moving really, really fast. At first, it was moving slowly, but I think it realized that I could see some part of it, and it decided it needed to get out of there. I saw more dirt and dust kick up. I saw this shimmery, wavy outline moving quickly, and the smoke from the fire get disrupted. I saw it climb up a tree. The way this thing moved was uncanny. It was so fast. When it got into the tree, I could see the branches moving. Leaves were falling from the tree, and part of it was shaking. It jumped from that tree and landed behind it. I could see where it landed too, and the leaves and dirt moved around. That's when my brain finally decided to react. I jumped up and pointed to where it landed, and I started yelling, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" But neither of my friends saw anything. I was so frustrated. The tree was still moving from where it had leapt out of it, and there were fresh leaves on the ground where it landed. My friends both said it was probably just a big bird or something that flew out of the tree, but I know that it wasn't. For one, you could see a friggin' bird. Whatever this invisible creature was, ran around and jumped up in a tree, like Predator or something. I couldn't brush it off this time. Something was happening. This was twice now that I've saw it. Why in the hell was this thing following me? It couldn't have been just a coincidence that I was the one that saw it again, right? And I'm sure it wasn't another one of the same thing that I just happened to stumble on 5 nights into a camping trip over an hour away from where I saw the first one. Right? Unless these things are all over the place and I just happen to be able to see them. That night, I had so many thoughts that I couldn't fall asleep. I kept thinking to myself if it was out there somewhere, stalking around our tent, or watching me from a tree. I also had no way of knowing how long it was there with us, just like the last time that I saw this thing. The thought of it being there the whole time while we were laughing and having fun was really creepy. When this thing moved, it was also as silent as a cat. So if it was out there right now, I'd have absolutely no way of knowing. When I got back from the trip, I started reading up on invisible creatures, but what I found was just a bunch of fiction. I was talking to one of my guy friends about it one day because he knew that I like ghosts and stuff, and we shared the same interest, so I figured he could be somebody that I could confide in. When I described it, he asked me, "Are you talking about the same type of thing as the alien from Predator?" I said, "Yeah, I guess so." I ended up renting a copy of it since Josh didn't own it, and I decided to watch it again since it'd been years since I saw it. When the alien came on screen and did his little cloaking thing, I got chills. That's exactly what I saw. Only, this one was smaller, and obviously not hostile like the alien in that movie. But I kept thinking, was it really an alien that I was seeing? I was never one to write off the existence of aliens out there somewhere, but in Minnesota of all places? And in my town? At a Burger King. Come on. I started reading about them and tried to find more encounters with invisible creatures, but my search only gave me more questions than it did answers. Like, what did it want? Why in the hell did it pick me to follow around? Was there more than one? Was it going to be hostile eventually? Was it going to hurt me? I had a million questions by the time I decided to stop researching. And to be honest, as a woman that lives alone, it just really made me anxious and creeped out. I couldn't just barricade myself inside my house. I needed to support myself, so I tried as best as I could to go about my life. And even if I did barricade myself in the house, who's to say that thing wasn't already in there watching me? I tried my best to just forget about that thing, and it seemed to work for almost an entire year too. It was about 9 months, give or take, after the second encounter that the third one happened. This one was by far the most unnerving because it happened at my home, right in my own frigging backyard. I was able to put those encounters in the back of my head since nothing had actually happened in so long, so I wasn't paranoid, not like after I had encounter number 2. I space out a lot when I have nothing to do, just so you know, and I just like staring out the windows for some reason, even though now I'm thinking twice about it. It was late April, and I was sitting on my couch, staring outside into the backyard, just spacing out. Then I saw that movement once again, and I knew exactly what was happening. That thing was back. I sat up and leaned over the couch to watch it. It was moving across my backyard, slowly. As usual, I could see that kind of wavy outline that disrupted the area that it was in, but just like always, that was the only thing that I saw. I crept over to the kitchen window to get a better look, and luckily I didn't lose track of it. It was closer to my house when I noticed it. Then it started to move towards my back fence. It would take a couple of steps and then stop. I don't know what it was doing when it was stopping, but I got the feeling like it was looking around, although obviously I can never confirm for sure. It did that several times though. It would take a few steps, stop for a minute, and then take a couple more. It did that all the way to the fence at the backyard. It stayed at the fence for about 30 seconds before I saw the ripples fly up and over the fence. I guess it must have jumped over the fence. It didn't look like it was climbing. It looked like one fluid motion. It just leapt over my fence. I didn't go out there to see if I could see it on the other side of the fence, obviously. After that, I haven't seen it since, but I try my best to be aware of my surroundings. I think about getting a dog all the time, so at least I have someone with me at home. I really think this is following me or is attached to me or something, because like I said earlier, the 3 spots that I have seen it are completely different, and with the exception of my house, completely random areas. It's not a coincidence that I keep seeing this thing. I know that. I don't know what it wants, and I'm not sure I want to. Like I said, it's never done anything to show that it's hostile. It usually just appears and then leaves. The fact that it moves silently and that neither of my friends saw it while we were camping scares me though. Why does it need to be so stealthy? Above all else, I would like to know just what in the hell it is. An alien? Guardian angel? A ghost? After that, I'd like to know why I'm the only one that seems to be able to see it. Hopefully after you post this on your channel, I'll be able to read comments from people that have theories. Or even better, people that have experiences with these creatures. It gets really quiet around here sometimes at night. That's when I shut all the blinds and double check all the doors and windows to make sure they're locked. Even though I'd like answers, I'm not sure I'm ready to have them. And I'm definitely not wanting to have a close encounter with this thing. Marie. Hello. As you are aware, this email is going to get into the encounters I've had with both Bigfoot and what people refer to as Dogman. More like Wolfman, if you ask me. For privacy's sake, I'm not going to give you my real name, the names of anyone involved, the agency I work for, or any other agencies that were involved. It's only after retiring from my position that I'm finally feeling comfortable making these encounters public. I imagine, though, that naming anyone or any agency involved could still upset quite a few people, not to mention the officials of the area. Also, I will absolutely not mention where this occurred, so please don't ask. I do not want these creatures endangered or killed. I'd recommend not searching for them in any area, because the things that I've seen them capable of are truly scary. They are both very territorial, and can be very aggressive when threatened. The position I've held before retirement, I held for over 30 years. To be vague, I was in charge of caring for the forest, the laws enforced in the forest, and the animals in the forest. My dad was also in the same field as myself when I was a boy, and I grew up in the forest. I know the forest very well. Keep this in mind as you listen on. The area I worked is pretty far out there, and I've had to perform search and rescues on missing hikers and campers more times than I'd like to admit. They don't always have a happy ending. That's not to say that they were the victims of these animals, though. But honestly, who knows? If you never find their bodies, I guess anything's possible. Starting in 2009, I have had several encounters with both species, and in my opinion, they are in fact animals. Whether they're both undiscovered species or beings from somewhere else entirely is beyond my knowledge, but my opinion remains. They are in fact animals. I've never encountered one of the Sasquatch any later than October, and never before April. I don't know if they hibernate or possibly even migrate, but they're smart animals, and they know how to survive. The first time one of these creatures made itself known to me was through the distinct hooting sounds. I've come to realize that those sounds are made by them when they vocalize and try to communicate with each other. I was pretty far out there on this occasion, and remember hearing what I thought at first resembled a monkey that you hear at the zoo. I shrugged it off, assuming it was a hiker, or even the sounds were being distorted because they were so far away. But after that, I began to hear the hoots and screams more regularly, and by this point, figured out something else was going on. Then I started to search for whatever it was making these noises. I'd come across huge footprints, and twice I found these strange huts or structures, and I assume these are the nests that they made. Now, I'm not a believer of the supernatural, or at least I wasn't at this point, but I'm not ignorant enough to write their existence off without a second thought either, so I was definitely intrigued by what I was witnessing. So, naturally, I searched harder. When I finally witnessed my first Sasquatch, I was on a ridge, doing my normal duties. I happened to catch a glimpse of something down below me. What I saw was this huge, ape-like creature, exactly like what you would expect Bigfoot to look like. Huge, hairy, long arms, primate, walking upright. This guy just looked like he was out for a morning stroll. And then, as quickly as I saw him, he walked back into the trees and was gone. This whole encounter only lasted a few minutes, but it was the most enlightening experience I've ever had. It was, for me, proof that these creatures exist. Like I said earlier, I've been in the forest in one capacity or another for my entire life. What I witnessed that day was no bear, no wolf, no human dressed in an ape suit. It was a real-life Sasquatch. With my first encounter out of the way, I admit I became a little obsessed with the thought of encountering it again, and even spent more time in the forest than I was required to by my job. I'd go back at that same ridge as much as I could to catch another glimpse of it, and every once in a while, I would see him. Sometimes he would walk straight through the clearing into the trees on the other side. Sometimes he looked as if he was searching for something. Lots of times, he'd be carrying small animals, sticks, rocks, something in his hand always. Witnessing this made me think of a few things though. 1. He's most likely an omnivore. 2. Seeing him with sticks and rocks might make him intelligent enough to use tools. And 3. He always seemed to be going to the same place. Perhaps it was his den. I keep saying he like I knew what gender this animal was, but truth be told, it could have been easily female, just as much as it was possible that it was male. I spent many nights there after that, camping out by myself, hoping to have a closer encounter. I would hear the calls he made occasionally. Then one night, to my surprise, I heard another one calling back to him. I stood up and listened, my heart racing. And then the calls happened again. They were communicating with each other. Man, I wish I knew what they were saying. It was the most unreal but natural experience that I've ever heard, hearing these creatures communicate back and forth. It was surreal, but also just completely exciting. One day, while I was on my usual route, I witnessed both of these Sasquatch on the shore of a lake. One of them was waist deep in the water, staring into it while the other was casually pacing on the shore. I watched them from the tree line, careful not to make any sound at all. All I wanted was to see them interact with each other. The one on the shore had what appeared to me defined breast. I assumed this one to be female. The one in the water looked to me like it was waiting for a fish or something. He abruptly stopped and stood up, and so did the female. They both lifted their heads and made these deep, inhaling, grunting noises. And then they looked in my direction. I froze, sure I was going to be attacked. I think they caught a whiff of my scent. The one in the water quickly got out and went to the other one. He was about a foot taller than the female. I assumed this one was male, because I didn't see a defined breast like on the other one. To my surprise, though, they didn't head in my direction. Instead, they took off in the other direction, not at a run, but more of a quick walk, almost like the walk that you saw in that old black and white video of a Sasquatch. I stood there, amazed, and admittedly a little unnerved. These animals blended in with the trees perfectly, and I lost sight of them quickly. After that, I went back to my usual route, and tried to calm down. I was an equal amount of excited and terrified. I guess that was a pretty close call. I was sure that they would both come at me, grab me by the arms, and rip me in half, but I don't know if they're just gentle by nature, or if they didn't want an interaction with me. But after that, I didn't see or hear them for quite some time. I was worried that I scared them off and they found a new place to live, but eventually I heard that familiar call again. I was relieved that they decided to stay. One thing you should know is that I haven't, nor will I ever, take a camera out with me. For one, proving these guys exist to the world could only bring them harm. And secondly, I heard a theory once, and I wish I could remember where, but they correlate aiming a camera at them with aiming a gun at them, and will react hostilely. Or maybe they're even just intelligent enough to know what a camera is, and they want to get rid of the evidence, but I've heard that if you take a picture of a Sasquatch, it may not end nicely for you. But after that, skipping ahead, these encounters had been going on for a while now, about 2 years. But like I said, not during the cold months. Maybe they don't like snow? Who knows? I had begun to become familiar with the two of them, and after a few more sightings, the male was larger and darker with a patch of very dark hair on his chest, while the female was smaller, had breast, and was a little lighter shade of brownish red. I started referring to them as him and her, not naming them, but just male and female, you know? If you're wondering, I never told anyone about what I've been experiencing at this point. I was just afraid that the information would get to the wrong people and these unique animals would be shot and killed. One night, while I was driving down the mountain, I saw what appeared to be this huge wolf moving through the bushes, but this guy was massive. It was on all fours, and even then it had to be 5 feet tall. We have timber wolves in the area, so a sighting isn't too uncommon, but this was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Its head was down in the bushes, so I didn't get a good look at it. At first. As I passed by, this thing lifted its head up, and my eyes must have grown 12 sizes, because this wasn't a timber wolf at all. It was something else. It looked like a frigging werewolf. It had these long teeth that jutted from its mouth. Its ears were long and triangular. It was shaggy, like a Malamute, but the eyes were the feature that really stuck out to me, because they were this yellow amber color, and they almost seemed to glow by themselves. I slowed to take a look at it, and it stared right back at me. It snarled, turned around, and ran off back into the thick of the trees. I stopped my truck and shone my light into the forest where this werewolf had just disappeared into, but I saw nothing. It was like it blended in just like the Sasquatch did. As my job calls for, though, I felt it was my duty to investigate further, so I parked my truck, unlocked my rifle from the spot on the back window, and went out to investigate. What I found were these huge wolf prints all around the bushes, and the carcass of a dead raccoon. I think it was interrupted in its dinner, and that's why it snarled at me. This raccoon was just mutilated, though. Actually looked like it was bitten clean in half. I continued to look around, but didn't manage to find anything else. This was November, so I hadn't seen the pair of Sasquatch in over a month, which wasn't unusual, because it was the time of the year where they weren't around. A little less than a month later, I found an elk carcass that had been just as mutilated as the raccoon. It was to the point, though, where it was missing its head and a back leg. Even in the snow, I could see it was dragged to this location, and there were those same wolf prints all around it, but there didn't appear to be more than one of these animals. Could it really have taken down a full-grown elk all by itself? I mean, after seeing these Sasquatch for so many years, I wasn't a stranger to supernatural things, or at least unexplainable things. But could one of these creatures really be a werewolf? Could it have taken down that elk without any help at all, and drug it all the way from where it had killed it? I don't know. But I do know that the most unnerving fact about what I saw were these tracks appeared to be bipedal. I thought to myself, though, that if an ape-like creature could exist and walk around on 2 legs, then why on earth couldn't a wolf creature? And I hope to God that it was just the same type of creature as this Sasquatch and wasn't actually a werewolf, because if they existed, then I would shit myself thinking of what else could exist. I looked around, suddenly unsure that I would be able to defend myself against one of these creatures should it have come back, and decided it would probably be the best idea to get in my truck and get the hell out of there. When I did get back to my truck, though, which was a couple clicks away from where I found the elk, I was speechless. Lying next to my front tire was the head of that elk. I spun around, looking at my surroundings, making sure nothing was sneaking up on me. I jogged all the way back to my truck, unlocking it before I even got there. As I reached it, the strongest smell of urine I have ever smelled hit me, and I noticed a large area of urine at my tire, just where the head was lying. I could tell that this thing had peed on my truck. I heard something large moving fast in the tree line, and then this most god-awful roar that I've ever heard. Believe me, Even as intrigued as I was seeing those Sasquatch, I did not stick around to see if this was that animal or not. I got the hell out of there. That night, when I got home and thought long and hard about what I just witnessed, I realized I didn't have the slightest clue of what it could be. And I didn't have the internet out there, so I couldn't search, so I just phoned a fellow officer and asked if he'd ever heard of anything unusual like what I encountered. To my surprise, he told me that he's heard stories from hunters and hikers about werewolves, but I laughed it off, trying to sound casual. I told him werewolves didn't exist, but in the back of my mind I was thinking, who the hell knows what the truth is? He asked me why I was asking him then, and I didn't have a good explanation. My next day off, I went into town and started researching what I had just seen. As it turns out, there are a lot of reports about this Dogman creature, and just as many theories on what it could be. I truly believe that it was using that elk head and its urine to mark its territory and warn me because it wanted me out of there. I didn't see it after a while, so I'm gonna fast forward until the part where I did see it again, which would be several weeks from my first encounter. But I did spend those weeks reading up on what I could. The more I read, the less I wanted to run into this animal again, but it was my job to be out there. I had reported the elk to my superiors. I left out the details of what else I encountered, but I felt they should be aware of animal mutilations in our district. All they told me was to keep an eye out for poachers, or even a pissed off bear that hadn't hibernated. Around mid-January is where I had my next sighting. I was on the ridge again, and once again I saw something moving. At first I thought it was one of the Sasquatch, even though it was way too early to see them. But then I saw him. This massive, huge-headed dog creature. It had a long snout, huge buff arms and legs, and again, it was walking upright. Unlike the Sasquatch, though, I was not intrigued or inclined to get closer to this thing. In fact, I had to suppress the urge to run at first. I watched as this thing went up to a tree and started sniffing it. Then it licked it and backed away like it didn't like the taste of it. Then it urinated around the bottom of the tree. It hit me, at least a theory that I had, that tree smelled like the Sasquatch, because that's what its territory was, and this Dogman creature was trying to take over. I wondered where the Sasquatch went each winter, and then worried that if they were hibernating somewhere, that this animal might find them and attack them. The Dogman repeated marking its territory twice before getting down on all fours and going back into the woods, and then once again I lost sight of it. For weeks, I thought about this creature, and what was going to happen when the Sasquatch returned. I didn't have any more sightings for weeks after that, and I was actually glad about this, and hoped that that thing grew tired of the area and moved on. Then one day, I heard his god-awful scream. Nothing like the Sasquatch. Where the Sasquatch sounded more primate, this definitely sounded more canine. It also began to let out this deep, loud yipping sound. It sounded like it was making a kill to me. When I finally caught a glimpse of the Sasquatch again, I was more than relieved, but started wondering if these two animals were about to have a turf war, or if they could exist together. But sure enough, I didn't have to wait too long to get my answer. I was out in the forest one afternoon in late April, and heard the loudest, most insane noises I've ever heard. It sounded to me like something was screaming and roaring all at the same time. Very, very aggressive. The closest thing I can relate to you is a gorilla that you'd see on an episode of Wild Kingdom or something like that, fighting another gorilla. This primal scream was accompanied by the yipping and screaming that I've come to realize is a Dogman. But this time, it sounded crazed, almost like it was fighting for its life. Foolishly, I ran towards the noises. I wanted to see what was going on. By the time I made it to that usual ridge, the sounds had stopped and the forest was silent. I didn't dare go down to where I'd seen both the Sasquatch and the Dogman, though. I'm not an idiot. As disappointed as I was to have missed the showdown, I didn't have to wait long to watch the show again. When it happened, I couldn't believe my eyes. Here I was, staring at two creatures that are supposed to be make-believe. A Sasquatch and, for all intents and purposes, a werewolf. What I witnessed was the Dogman and the male Sasquatch squaring off. They stood several feet from each other, both roaring and grunting. The Dogman was standing upright, squatting down a little bit, his arms stretched at the elbows, his claws ready to attack. Believe me, if he'd landed a blow with those claws, the Sasquatch would have known about it. His mouth was open in this snarl, just like a wolf defending its territory. He was shifting his weight back and forth on his legs like he was getting ready to react to the Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch looked like he was trying to make himself look larger. His chest was puffed up. He was standing straight up and was also snarling at the Dogman. He hit his chest once with both hands and then let them hang at his sides. He wasn't shifting his weight. He was standing still. He roared at the Dogman, which just roared/screamed right back at him. Then another scream ripped through the forest and the female Sasquatch burst through the trees. She roared at the Dogman too and hit her own chest. The Dogman pivoted to her and let out this scream that gave my entire body chills. I think that creature knew at this point it was outnumbered and overpowered. It roared again, but stepped back away from them. The male Sasquatch stepped towards the Dogman, and it moved further back. Both Sasquatch roared again, and the Dogman went back into the woods. It backed away, keeping its eye on them. It never turned its back on them. I watched as the Sasquatch breathed heavy before turning and heading back into the forest in the other direction. I waited there for 10 minutes before deciding that not only was the show over, but I should probably get back to my truck before it got too late. I didn't want to be out in the woods after dark this time. I never saw the Dogman again. I think the Sasquatch scared it off and reclaimed their territory. Or maybe I missed the final showdown and they killed it somewhere. I've seen them numerous times since then, but that interaction with the Dogman was by far the most fascinating of all the encounters that I've witnessed. I would go into the other sightings, but they get mostly repetitive. They usually consist of me watching them from the ridge or finding footprints, hearing their calls or finding the trees that they destroy. Even some scat sometimes. I don't go out there as much now that I've retired. I do worry about the next person that takes my position and how they'll react to seeing them when they do. I go out there when I can to see if I can catch a glimpse of them, but it's not as easy when you're not out there every day. Right now it's the cold season, so they wouldn't be out there anyways. I often wonder where that Dogman ended up. I wonder if he'll ever come back. Or if maybe all these reports that you're hearing are the same Dogman that moved on somewhere else and claimed that as his territory. I always keep my eye out for reports of animal mutilations that match what I witnessed, just in case. So, I want to leave you with this. If you're out there and you hear sounds of animals that you can't identify, or your body is telling you that you should leave, you should probably listen to it and get the hell out of the forest. Thank you for listening. Have a good night. Hello there. I live in Mississippi, and I encountered a Dogman in June. I really don't want my name getting out there as the guy that saw a werewolf, so let's just refer to me as Bob. You hear stories around here about these weird creatures stalking the area, looking in windows and chasing cars, but until that night, I didn't believe them. So I live in this 2-story house, and when my encounter happened, I was just settling down for the night. My normal routine is take a shower, pour myself a drink, and sip on it as I look out my bedroom window and watch the peacefulness of the night. Well, on this night it was anything but peaceful, believe me. I first noticed something in my neighbor's backyard as it was moving around in the shadows. It looked to me like it was sniffing around, although I couldn't make out any details. I watched it for a bit, thinking it might be her new dog since she'd just lost her old terrier a week or so prior. This thing looked bigger than her last dog. A lot bigger. The only thing that illuminated her backyard was a little porch light, and it really didn't give off much light either, but when this thing went past the light, I saw it for what it really was. It was enormous, and it looked like a wolf, not a dog. But how could it be a wolf? And why was it that big? It was bigger than any wolf or dog I'd ever seen. And something about it was just wrong. It was gray, or at least it looked gray in that yellowish light that the porch light was giving off. It had big, powerful looking legs and a very large head with a long muzzle. The ears looked long to me, and skinny, and it looked like it had a bushy tail. Seeing that was enough for me to turn out my light, but it didn't stop me from watching it. I just wanted the cover of the darkness so I could see this thing without it seeing me. It went back into the shadows, but now that I knew what I was looking for, it was a little easier to see. And it looked like it was digging up the ground in her backyard. I had to steady myself and try to figure out just what the hell it was that I was seeing, because everything was just so weird at that moment. I called my neighbor and told her that I was witnessing something in her backyard, and I could hear her start breathing faster and faster. She was silent for a moment, and then told me she'd gone upstairs. Then she asked what she should do. I was clueless. I didn't know what was even going on, let alone what I could tell this poor lady what to do. She told me she was getting her gun, and I told her I didn't think that she should go after whatever that thing was in the backyard. She said if it was to come in her house, that's what the gun was for. I told her that was probably a good idea, and I begged her not to go outside. I think at this point we were both just considering that the things you hear around here might actually be true, but neither one of us wanted to admit that we were looking at something that was called a Dogman. Believe me, my head was spinning, and we were both talking in whispers by now too, although I don't really know why, considering I was in an entirely different house, and I doubted that thing could hear me. She told me she couldn't see anything from her vantage point. I looked up at her window and saw the tiniest slit of light coming from it. She was peering outside too. I told her where it was, and she was silent for a long time. I asked her if she was okay, and she whispered, "That's where I buried Oscar. Is it digging up my dog?" I tried to make out more of the scene, but I couldn't see anything else in the shadows. I realized I was holding my breath and exhaled, and then told her to call animal control. She didn't want to disconnect from me, but I told her I'd be here when she was finished, and she could call me right back. As I waited for the phone to vibrate again, I watched the shadowy figure moving around the same spot, and thought to myself that it probably smelled the decay of the dog and wanted to eat it. The motion changed after that, and it looked like it had stopped digging and was now tugging on something. I swear to you, it looked like it was crouched down on its hind legs and using its front legs to tug on what I assumed at this point was the dog corpse. When the phone started vibrating again, I almost shit myself. My neighbor told me that nobody answered at animal control. I told her that I thought it was digging up her dog, and she wanted to go down and shoot it. I talked my crazy neighbor out of going and fighting a monster. I mean, she wasn't Van Helsing, right? She said she was calling the cops then, and I said that was probably a good idea too, and begged her to still stay inside, no matter what that thing was doing to poor Oscar. As she called the cops and stayed on the phone with them, I saw it again as it came back into the light. Only this time, there were two different things about it. The first was that it had Oscar dangling from its jaws. Even in the dull light, I could tell it was the deceased dog. And the more important detail? It was standing on its back two legs, walking around like a person. My breath caught in my throat. My legs began to shake, and I thought they were going to give out completely. I grabbed the windowsill to brace myself. Everything I ever heard about these things was true. These things aren't only real, but they have no problems coming into civilization. My mind started to swirl as I thought of all the times that somebody told me any encounter that they thought they had with this creature. I always just shrugged it off and thought it was their imagination or that they were trying to dick with me, but now that I saw one for myself, every single thing I ever heard, it was all true. I got a really good look at it this time. It was covered in fur. Tall. Taller than an extremely tall man. Its body looked human, except for the way that the legs bent, like it was standing on its toes. The head was definitely canine though. Just like a wolf. It looked like someone plucked the head off of a huge wolf and stuck it on a man's body. I was horrified as I watched it pull at Oscar. It was tugging pieces of it out of its mouth, and it was using its front paws as hands. I got nauseous thinking about how it was eating the rotting flesh of an animal, and I wanted to vomit all over myself. Then, this thing leapt over the fence. I'm not talking about it grabbed it and hopped over. I mean this thing jumped over the 6-foot fence and cleared it. I watched and waited until the cops arrived. I watched as they went into the backyard with flashlights and guns, saw them investigate the empty grave, looked into the hollow hole that Oscar used to be in, and watched my neighbor come out to the porch, still in a panic. After a long time, she called me again, and told me they found nothing, except for the empty grave. They didn't find poor Oscar's body either. I expected that, though. I saw that poor dog inside that thing's huge mouth. I didn't mention that part to my neighbor. I figured I'd spare her the heartache. By this time, it was 3 a.m. and I was exhausted. Once my neighbor's son arrived, she felt safe enough to hang up. I laid down and quickly fell asleep, although that was a restless sleep with dreams of that thing in her backyard. I only slept a couple hours, too. I went to visit my neighbor the next day, and I investigated the grave myself. Sure enough, had used its claws to dig it up. I asked her what exactly she told the cops, and she said she told them that a large animal was in her backyard and that she was afraid for her life. They told her to stay in the house, and they would send someone over immediately. Sounds to me, though, like they've had this problem before. Maybe they've heard the same stories that I did. Maybe this is just gonna be another encounter that they talk to their buddies about over a beer. As for why it dug up poor Oscar's body, I still don't have real answers. Maybe this particular one was injured. Maybe as a species they're scavengers when they have to be, and hunters when they can be. Who knows? I saw what I saw and I know what happened. I still look out of my window every night, although now I have a rifle by my bed. My neighbor and I don't really talk much about that incident. She moved in with her boyfriend in November. For the record, I don't live in Taylor, although I know about what goes on there. I guess I live close enough to still be in the hot zone. I try to get everything I need done before the sun sets after seeing that thing. After what I saw, I don't like nighttime anymore. I'm afraid of what's hiding in the shadows. Sincerely, Bob.